Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis. We'll be continuing our explorations of the cultures of consciousness. I had a fine time last night here in Los Angeles with Daniel Pinchbeck and crew. We were celebrating the release of a new book, Exploring the Edge Realms of Consciousness, which obviously resonates with part of the interest of this show. I have a piece in that, along with a lot of other characters. But one of the interesting things that came up during it is the place where we did the event was a place called The Hub, and I guess there's lots of hubs all over the world, and they're designed to be kind of spaces for innovation and interaction between different kinds of groups and people, small, businesses, social meetings, and you kind of join up. It's like a membership society, but it had the sense of kind of like an open forum office, and there was lots of room for interaction, and it really gave me a strong sense of how a lot of the ideas of interaction, of different perspectives and different angles, and people coming from different perspectives, creating kind of an ecology of innovation and novelty as a way to confront the sort of crisis and reorganization and confusion of our contemporary moment. And I was thinking about that sense of the ecology and how we kind of act as individual agents in relationship to other people, other institutions, other events, how we weave ourselves in between these different orientations as a way to create a kind of culture of what's going to come next, which is inevitably going to be larger than our own individual plans and possibilities. And part of this was inspired by our guest today, Michael Garfield, who we've had on the show before and is a great whiz-bang thinker and talker, a real fun conversationalist who rides a lot of edge realms as well as a lot of different kinds of communities and ideas. But we had been talking specifically about how music and his musical practice is a kind of ecology of technology and of organicism, and so I think it's a kind of an inspiring moment for that. We're not going to have our co-host Majid on this episode, unfortunately. So I think with that, I'll just go right into bringing Michael Garfield on the show. Michael's a musician, artist, thinker, talker, festival figure, and a real interesting cat. And so I'm glad to have him back on the show. Hey, Michael, welcome to Expanding Mind.
Hi, Erik. How you doing?
Very good, very good. Where are you calling from?
I'm back up in Boulder, Colorado temporarily, but living in Austin, Texas these days.
So are you more or less settled, or do you have a totally nomadic lifestyle?
Well, Austin represents for me now the end of a 3-year couch surfing extravaganza. It's really wonderful to have my own bed again, but part of the momentum that I started to build up over the last few years working a festival circuit primarily over the summers that started to grow into the rest of my year is that there's no rest for the wicked, basically. I'm on the road a lot still, but very glad to have finally found a place where I feel supported and embedded in a community and ready to really dig in,
Wait, so what was it about Austin?
I couldn't really tell you. I think what I tell people in general as, sort of a performance of my thinking about these things is that when I lived in Boulder, Colorado, it's very arid and windy here, and visually you're confronted every day with the sharp relief of those flat irons, the mountains right at the edge of town. And in Austin, it's hill country. It's a fault zone. It's full of underground limestone aquifers and mineral springs, and there's something about just the geography of the place that encourages a more diverse and fertile culture. The fact that it's so close to the Mexican border, that it's that all of the hills in the area seem to naturally segregate different pockets of the culture. So it seems to me that
it's It's like San Francisco a little bit that way, where it's like the topography creates little pockets of microculture, almost like microclimates.
Yeah. So in a very real sense, when I was living in Boulder, if you made a fool of yourself, it would be pretty hard to live it down in a respect. Like you get to a point in this small town vibe, even though it's this thriving internet-enabled community where it's very hard to redefine yourself. Whereas I get the feeling in Austin that there's sort of endless potential for rediscovery of the town itself and my relationship to it.
Well, we're talking about whatever you could call psychogeography, the way in which the shape of a place and the geographical location create a certain kind of culture. And when you were traveling around, you were going to festivals all over the place, visiting lots of cities, lots of towns, spending time at whatever. All this, you had a wide range of experiences. And sometimes I know when I travel, I experience lots of differences. It's like this is different, this place is new. There's like a flavor, a freshness to each spot. But then there's another side of travel, especially in our kind of hyper-mediated, hyper-modern world where, we have our internet connection. The screen follows us everywhere we go. And more you see the same kinds of things places because the culture is more networked. It's more distributed. There's similar subcultures all over the planet. The restaurants look similar. The cars look the same. There's a kind of sameness. So it's this weird experience I have when I travel sometimes of this kind of war between sameness and difference. And I'm curious, since you were doing it for a long time and seeing lots of different scenes, how you did you come to appreciate the differences that places have for people and culture more, or did you start to see this kind of, sameness kind of creeping in, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago when I was helping Charles Shaw with his Exile Nation documentary, a lot of the touring that we did was up and down I-95 on the East Coast in the United States. And really the only place to get healthy food for hundreds of miles was at the Starbucks that they would have. They had some sort of exclusive deal with the interstate where they were the only place that you could, get a coffee, along the highway. So in that respect, it was sort of a denuding or a crime in that same way that we see the disappearance of languages, the same way that we see the disappearance of species that we haven't even discovered or identified. But on the other hand, another thing that I find in common everywhere I go, and I know that this is again something that has come into being in part because of the flattening of the internet and the way that people plug into this sort of similar culture as well as a media environment, is that everywhere we went, you talk about Daniel Pinchbeck and the Evolver community, we were touring these places where we found the same enthusiasm in the groups that we were meeting with. It didn't matter where they were. These were people who were interested in transformational culture, in permaculture, in radical civic design, that were interested in an archaic revival and returning to these ancestral wisdom traditions and trying to find a way to retranslate them into a modern context. And I know that I'm spoiled being someone that moves largely within festival and circus and celebratory communities in general. But I think that even when I've dipped into more, I would go say confrontational or desperate activist type communities, the one thing that I do see among everyone, regardless of their general cultural disposition, is a real hunger for something different and a real eagerness to participate in the construction of that thing. So
yeah, that was kind of what I felt last night. I mean, I've tapped into that feeling many times. It's one of the things that drives me. It drives this show, drives my work. But I really had this kind of extra sense. It's almost like you get these waves that people, partly because things are desperate, partly because people look at on the horizon and see, so much difficulty, and it's right in your face in a lot of ways, and that even if you're able to tap into a kind of celebratory, ecstatic vibe, or you have a grounding in some kind of a tradition that gives you ballast in the midst of all this chaos, that there's so much turbulence about that. People are almost going, well, look, the only way to really be an optimist is to just throw yourself into the possibility of the moment. And you get that sense of a tremendous dynamic possibility, this kind of innovative exuberance that's taking new institutional form. And for me, I think a lot of the issue now is that I think that the willingness among people are there, a general culture of experiment and hopeful interaction and engagement is there. And what we need now is to develop these kind of a friend of mine called them feral institutions, like frameworks that are more than just individuals or groups or scenes, that have more institutional coherence, but are also subtler, quicker on their feet, more agile, not like locked in the way that we think of more capital I institutions like universities or established art museums or venues. There's something in between that I think will kind of create this this framework that I think has something to do with the kind of ecological thinking that we've been talking about. But also, we're just chatting here, and I wanted to make sure that we got to your music, which is sort of the central thread of the tapestry that you're interested in exploring. And you have a new record coming out, and you recorded it and made it and brought a lot of intentionality to the packaging and all that, and I think in a very interesting way that reflects some of these issues that musicians and other artists are going through as they try to kind of remake what it is that they're doing in relationship to all these technological and cultural changes we're talking about. So just talk a little bit about your record and how you recorded it and what went into it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, musically, what I'm doing is fairly straightforward. I'm getting up there with an acoustic guitar and a vocal microphone, running my sound signal through a huge rack of effects, looping it, and improvising these, layered, textural, frequently but not always melodic, oftentimes kind of aggressive or dark, and then oftentimes very folksy and shimmery instrumental pieces. And I came into this largely because of not my work as a guitarist or a musician, but as my work as a visual artist doing performance painting at other people's concerts. And it just happens that most of the events where that kind of performance has taken hold have been electronic music events where there was a strong emphasis on a multimedia, multisensory, immersive environment, because it's honestly just not all that interesting to watch a DJ sit behind his computer. And I think that's largely why, hula hoopers and aerial fabric artists and live painters and everybody else was given this opportunity to get involved, because it wasn't seen as direct competition with the headlining act. It was seen as this complementary, symbiotic relationship. But it wasn't at all clear to me how I was going to take my own music into this environment, and it sort of became fused with this electronic thing. And I recognized that the more I included processing and rhythmic looping and this kind of thing, the more it had an obvious place. There's a chill tent at most of these events, where once you're done, raging out on 200 BPM psytrance and you want to go relax, then somebody with an actual instrument who's playing, something hypnotic and evocative can take people on a voyage. That's something that, I'm not by any means the only person who's managed to fill this niche. Another really excellent example is Dixon's violin, who's a real popular figure at Burning Man and stuff like that. But, the thing about this is that I'm still just one guy up there. And as a musician, that's frustrating and kind of boring, even though I get to play with this enormous cockpit, this spaceship of stuff. And I'm usually pretty good about establishing a rapport with an audience that I still struggle with it being almost unprofessional, that I will spend so much of my set talking to people. But it's out of this desire to connect, this desire to, Hakim Bey said, he had this wonderful essay that was up on Psychedelic Salon a while back where he was discussing tearing down the proscenium, and there's a very direct emphasis on let's all do this together in this transformational festival scene. And it just seems foolish to me that I'm up there pretending, in spite of the fact that I do have, a specialty and an expertise, that I'm not just some other guy, and that I want to present myself in a way that's empowering and inclusive rather than mystifying and estranging. So that's where the packaging and all that stuff came in, because I know all of these other visionary artists through my work, and I wanted to include as many other people and in this as possible, just even if they're not actually creating something new for the record itself, to participate in some way where not only could I promote and share all of my friends who are supremely talented and I love what they're doing, but also so that I had this extra layer that I could add on to it where the visual elements and the musical elements come together and form this interference pattern. And there's a whole new gesture that can be, interpreted and extracted from that.
Yeah, I mean, another way of thinking this is the kind of evolution or transformation of the basic idea of the remix, and at this point, from my generation, to everybody younger, it's like we come up with the sense of the remix as like a fundamental way of approaching cultural production, where it's not just you're making something original, but you're taking a bit of this and that, and precisely the way that they get spliced together or juxtaposed is part of the effect. And what I'm hearing from you is not just that, well, you can do that, like, if your music per se doesn't necessarily do that, but you can do that within the context of making a record or hip hop record or remix album, well, all the kind of stuff you can do within the music. But there's a kind of another layer of it where what you want to represent is how any position you're taking, your authority, you have an intellectual perspective, you're a musician, you're an artist, you're someone who's helping to promote or create the event, that all of these different perspectives are kind of woven together, and that what the event is increasingly a kind of sampling of all these different perspectives woven together. So you get that sense of a larger ecology. So it's like, yeah, there's one guy on the stage who's doing this one thing, and we're all paying attention to him right now. But there's all sorts of ways in which you and the scene itself kind of remind everybody that it's part of this larger circuit, and it's you see that very much in this kind of celebratory cultures you're talking about, in Burning Man and a lot of the festival culture. It's like, where is the thing? Is at a festival culture, is it the DJ? Of course not. Is it the guy doing the lights that combine with the music in order to create a sensorium for an individual dancer? Is it the individual dancer? No, of course it's large collective bodies that are moving in space. Is it just the dance floor? No, of course not. It's also the circuit of food and chai and chill and camps that produce it. And so we enter into these ecologies, and I just got the sense that even though you're you're a solo artist, that you kind of the way that you're approaching your music kind of taps in to some of that stuff. And even the way you talk about looping itself. I mean, like the relationship with the technology and with the repetition and with the echo of your own, you make a gesture, a musical gesture, and then it repeats through the machine, and then and it transforms through the machine, and then you respond to that again in real time. I mean, that must be, on a conceptual level or philosophical level too, that's a really interesting place to be.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the music remixes itself. Definitely, I'm fascinated by the way that, because this particular project is entirely improvisational, and so I get to watch as I'm using a multi-channel looper, so I can stack a phrase on top of a phrase on top of a phrase, and then move over to another channel, set something else up, and then pull the scaffolding out. Pull that entire first phrase out, and then suddenly it's almost as if this thing that's been there the whole time now has been removed. It's been brought into figure out of the ground, and it becomes the scaffolding for a new thing. And that's very much a performance of this sort of networked and provisional relationship that I have to reality, where there's no absolute ground, But then you're right, totally taking it beyond the musical matrix itself. This is very much a way for me as an artist to work through and experience my understanding of the evolutionary process. I mean, that's what I went to school for, and my interest is in the emergence of greater patterns of complexity from, what we would consider or perceive as lesser patterns. And the landmark moment for us metaphorically was the emergence of multicellular life out of this sort of bacterial slime, and how what that did was it created a syntax of genetic codes that were able to relate to one another. Those bacteria had already come together into a nucleated cell and had created a syntax of organelles out of what had once been free-living creatures. And I see a similar thing going on with us right now where, we're establishing a kind of global city with a new layer of specialization and personalization and a new type of syntax between the senses and between people who perform in media specific to senses. So like in my shows, I make a point. Again, the reason that it was so important for me to emphasize, this sort of multimedia collaboration in the digital release was because most of these shows were done in conjunction with aerial fabric artists or hoopers or, visual projection artists who are improvising to my music while I'm improvising to them. And so there very much is this co-creational, groundless dynamic. And, I think within about 50 years, we'll have figured out how to make this work politically. But right now, it's just most important to express it as a way of seeing and of being.
Yeah, it almost seems like, someone asked a question last night about, people were talking about consciousness and states of extraordinary states of experience and how do we, what kind of glimpses they give us of the nature of reality of who we are. And someone was asking just a really political point, she basically said, I'm old enough to remember the 60s, and I can see the way that this is sort of carrying on and, transforming some of that moment and some of the things that people were discovering and working through there. But the political conversation is really different or even kind of absent. And that she meant politics in a certain way of kind of solidarity of really getting behind a certain kind of perspective. And of course there's all that going on as well. There's Occupy, there's people who are, like you say, more of the, just disturbed, intense side of activism, which definitely overlaps some of this other more celebratory culture, if you will. But I think, and maybe it's maybe it's not the whole story, but that part of what's happening is that a culture is developing that's encouraging people to trust the processes of emergence and on-the-fly innovation and collaboration, and to really learn how to kind of do that, so that when more tough real-world situations, but also really interesting possibilities emerge on a larger technological, institutional, material culture level, that there's sort of a language to engage those possibilities in a really fresh way. That's part of what I think is going on, and improvisation is part of that, and of course improvisation is as old as the hills, musically. That's probably, they weren't composing from day one, they were just messing around, and yet somehow, especially with the rise of electronic music and how important recorded music has been to the counterculture and to cultural expression in general for the last 100 years, that even though, of course, there's jazz, there's tons of incredible improvisers, that as a cultural model, in a way, we kind of lost it for over the last couple decades. And so the emphasis on improvisation seems really key. And like, what does that mean for you? Like, what is it, why do you do improvisation rather than, writing? I know you've also written tunes and stuff, but there's something special about the improvised mode as a way to deal with these emerging cultural conditions.
Yeah. A while back when you had Rich Doyle on the show, and he was discussing the psychedelic, or what he calls the ecodelic perspective, as a kind of evolutionary strategy for managing the complexity of the 21st century media environment, and I think that's very much what's going on here, is that the remix and that the resurgence of improvisation in this context, this new kind of context of cybernetic science and emergence, complexity theory, these things, we understand that there is a syntax between the people, and that therefore, in the sense that a word, I might come to the party as a specific word or phrase, and upon arriving, that word or phrase takes on meaning in relationship to the other words or phrases that all of these other people bring, But if you just have, I watched Live and Let Die again the other night, and there's a tarot reader in that show, and she pulls the death card. And, in the movie, back in the 70s, very few people were aware of the death in the tarot as being as being generically transformational. So every time she pulls this in the card in the movie, they have that like bum bum bum, and somebody's like, oh no, I'm going to die. But it's totally out of context. Death in and of itself means nothing, without knowing what kind of death. Was it an honorable death? Did you survive it? And so again, this is part of that tearing down of the proscenium. Improvisationally, I don't stand on the pretense of knowing how it is that I'm going to relate to everyone else there when I get there. One of my pretty frequent visual collaborators is my friend Topher Sipes. His project is called Art Theism, and he works routinely with a dancer as a live digital improvisational projectionist. So he's using an iPad app and this animation software and projecting onto her. It's one project. Another project very similar to that is Phaedroid with Andrew Jones and Phaedra, that people might be more familiar with. And in that sense, that project got started when he was doing visual projections for the experimental musician Roger Sellers at South by Southwest last year. And she just came up to him at the party and said, do you mind if I dance in front of your projection screen? And then suddenly there's this new element that's interposed itself, and it catalyzed this totally amazing and still unfolding, accelerating creative revelation for both of them. So you just never know. There's always a third person in the room with two people.
That's a great that is there always a third person in the room with two people. That's really good kind of systems thinking. There's always a third, and playing and talking and engaging in light of that third is a real key ingredient to what we're talking about. We're going to have to take a break right now. You're listening to Expanding Mind with Erik Davis. We're talking with Michael Garfield about music. We haven't listened to any music yet. We'll listen to some when we come back right after these messages. Welcome back to Expanding Minds. I'm Erik Davis, and we're talking with Michael Garfield this hour. Of course, you can always listen to our archive of past shows on the Progressive Radio Network archives, so check that out. But so we're talking about, Michael, what's the name of your new record?
It's called Love Scenes and Field Recordings.
Love Scenes and Field Recordings. So let's play a track from it. I know you sent us a sample, so to speak, a selection from Undefeatable. Anything you want to say about that track before we listen to it?
The naming again is improvisational. They don't have a clear concept when I go into it, but then when it's done, I'll listen to it over and name it something. And this one started out, you don't get to hear the whole thing, but it started out, very kind of contemplative and melancholic, and then gets progressively more triumphant. So this is Undefeatable Optimism Gets Up After KO.
I love that. All right, so we'll hear that track now, and we'll come back in a second. So that was it. Say the title again, man. I loved it.
Undefeatable Optimism Gets Up After KO. It's based on a samurai proverb: fall down 7 times, stand up 8.
Awesome. No, I can.
That's my experience improvising music in front of large audiences, for sure.
And also, you're also still up there with an acoustic guitar, which of course is in a way, it's the most successful instrument in the history of the planet. I mean, there are, more guitars on the planet than any other instrument. It's incredibly iconic for the 20th century. But it's also, it's this thing of wood and air and, metal or catgut. And it's this, it's very much a kind of artifact of a pre-modern world that we hold on to. So how is that part of your work in terms of, maintaining a connection to the guitar, to the kinesthetics of it, to the physical body of it, in light of the sort of electronic environment that you're plugging into, both your own gear and the larger kind of electronic music festival culture?
Well, there's a concept that I learned about recently in a critique of touchscreen technology called haptic feedback. Perhaps you're familiar with it. It's the notion that the screen doesn't touch you back. You don't know how hard you're pushing. It doesn't know how hard you're pushing. And this is turning out to be a real problem for people who were once really enthusiastic about the whiz bang of this kind of thing, but realizing that the sensitivity and the responsiveness of a thing really open up this. It's a simple issue of dimensionality, and when you are attempting to express yourself creatively, you want as many. Obviously it's important to limit yourself in certain ways, and that's the other side of it, is that in a sense the guitar for me is a limitation. I'm not able to stand up there with a laptop and create the fullest possible sound available to me technologically at this time, and I really enjoy working with that limitation in the same way that it's fun to start a painting with a line already on the page, something that's suggestive. This is the way that evolution works, in that there's always a context, there are always limiting resources, but then also very much the fact that it's a live instrument and that we're still dealing with the movement of air and of magnetic fields, and we're not simply putting out a sound signal, through the computer into the house, means that I'm constantly struggling, grappling with feedback loops that vary from venue to venue. The way, how flexible the stage is. If the stage is made out of light enough wood, then the entire stage will vibrate while I'm playing, and my knobs and my faders will vibrate, and it changes. The pickup, I can lean into, the phase. The wave is coming out of the subs beneath me in a certain way that if I'm holding the guitar at one angle, I get the sound I would get at home, and if I hold the guitar at another angle, the bass frequencies start to swell, through bone conduction through my own body, sitting in the chair, up into the magnetic pickup. And it really, I think that it's contiguous with this idea that what I'm doing up there is sort of lassoing the moon. I'm trying to remain as open and as sensitive to every possible energetic influence available to me in that moment,
Well, yeah, and that's actually one of the things I love about instrumental solo guitar, is that even though it can be, incredibly, how to say this, very, powerful, expertly delivered with, tremendous, excellence, that there's also in which it can kind of weave itself, not into the background necessarily, but it can support like a larger situation. There's something about the way that even in the guitar in particular, it can be, you can be an impresario, but you're also kind of reflecting the larger scene in a way that it can be very accessible, even as it can be really experimental at the same time. So it seems like that improvisatory flavor goes well with this sort of, classic instrument. But are you going to stick with that, or like what interests you, or how do you see your music, evolving at this point, since it's clearly constantly, under
to it, impresario. I mean, if I'm to catch the gist of what you were saying, is that it's definitely it's in a position of support.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and very much I think kind of the role that I've started to recognize for myself in this whole scene is very much a ceremonial one. It's very much about leading people, taking people by the hand and leading them into my own experience of all of the convergent influences of that moment. I'm, following people like Random Rab and, again, Dixon's violin. I'm really a fan of the sunrise and sunset sets, these moments of transition, these liminal spaces, where it's, you really are capable of creating something profound by ushering people through a specific experience at that time. In a similar way, I really love playing for pregnant women, because I have this sense that it's programming the child on some profound level, and that it's an enormous honor to be there and to be participating in that.
Yeah, it's funny, but you bring up the sort of birth side of it. We had a guest a couple of months ago, Rue Callender, who's a green undertaker in the UK, and he put out this collection of essays about new ways of thinking about, or very ancient ways of thinking about dying and death. And there was a wonderful, fascinating, almost eerie essay by a woman whose practice, she's a harper, so she plays, I think, like Irish folk harp, like one of the smaller harps, and she'll play it for the dying and go there and actually sort of help support the process both of transition and of the sort of lingering flame of life, even to the point of talking about that the rhythm of the music will be supporting the breathing and really getting in sync with the kind of breathing, but obviously it's also creating this aesthetic support for transition. And when you always have this thought about like, oh my God, I'm on my deathbed, like it's going to be so freaky. What could I possibly want? You want your loved ones there to like be able to hold your hand or look up in their face, but to have like extraordinary but also supportive music. That was a really good word you pulled out of my gibberish. To really hold up this kind of larger process. I think it's a really powerful way of thinking about music, because I play. I love to improvise with my guitar, do open tuning, finger picking that I've been doing for 20 years or whatever. And the happiest I am playing is when my friends are having a party, and while we're having a party, my friends are just sitting around talking or hanging out, and I'm just kind of in the corner, like making, holding, shaping, shifting, selecting, responding to the emotions. And it's like it's there, the music's there, but it's also just kind of supportive. It's kind of woven into something rather than being on stage and like, okay, now improvise and entertain people or engage people directly, which is another kind of work, which just has its own fun too. But there's something about that supportive element that I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and it's very true that, these two different musical styles that I've explored, for about a decade before I started doing this, I was fairly straightforward. I mean, using a lot of kind of avant-garde percussive techniques, but mostly writing music and playing it for people. And I feel very comfortable in that environment, presenting a finished product to people. The irony is that if I try to do them both on the same show, there comes a point in the show when I'm ready to yield to the moment and to be in that kind of interpreter position, and suddenly I'm not cool with being in front of those people anymore. I have to pretend I'm in a corner.
Very.
But and then we talked about this a little bit before I came on the line. My father is an employee of the Walt Disney Company. And, I have complex feelings about all of that. But, if I put aside my criticism of the company and its history and its practices, and I look at things, for example, like the way that philosopher William Irwin Thompson cites Fantasia, seeing Fantasia at the age of 4 as his first really legitimate spiritual experience. And the way that people, millions of people in the modern era may have found a moment of transcendence at one of the Disney parks that would have been otherwise unavailable to them in particular late industrial capitalist environment. What was this? One of your guests about the magician talked about magical experience design.
Sure.
And it's very much that. It's a crafting of the landscape. And yeah, it's, fake rocks, fake waterfall, fake trees. There's a speaker in the rock. But it's a remarkable spectacle, a transportive spectacle.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of
I'm carrying on in that way.
With the whole idea of experience design. I mean, it's a really interesting way to think about what's happening with art, what's happening with cultural creation. What are you really doing? Is it that you want to entertain? Is it that you want to inspire? Well, what does it mean to actually create sort of environments which there's different ways you can design experience in a fascist way where you're controlling everybody's responses, and it's directed towards, very specific ends or very specific states of consciousness, or you're creating a more open environment where almost like the tools of creation are themselves open and available for people on whatever level to respond to. So that's what's sort of weird about the Disney model. It's like I have it too. It's like I loved Disneyland when I was a kid. I went there, and like I even now I'll be in some enchanted, monastery in an obscure part of the world, and I'll go through a tunnel and go, God, this is cool. It's sort of like Tom Sawyer's Island. It's like those structures are laid down, deep in my phantasmic imagination, and I can't fault them for that. But at the same time, you want to in a way, the speaker's hidden in the rock, but here's the wiring for the speaker. So when you feel, here's how to move it around, or you want to be able to have both the surface and the kind of under the wiring beneath be part of the experience, so it's not just like a completely kind of cookie cutter kind of environment. And in that sense, I'm really curious. You spend a lot of time at festivals. You're observing these things. You're plugged into the kinds of ideas that people are bringing to their practices. What do you think is what is the kind of goal? What is the experience that is being optimally designed for in the larger festival culture now? Or if that's changing, what is it changing to? Is it because and let me just back up a little bit, because obviously having some kind of ecstatic experience is very important. So the Psytrance dance floor is designed for really intense, mind-boggling, states of transcendence or intensity or whatever. And that's cool. That's great. I love it. That there's an, ancient tradition of that kind of stuff. But there's something more. There's something more interesting. There's something more collective happening there. But I can't quite put my finger on it. I'm curious how you see of that balance of experience and design that's going into festival culture now.
Well, my first response is that I'm with you. I don't want to stand on the conceit that I actually know what's emerging, because it's bigger than all of us. But on the other hand, I think the real obvious contrast with the sort of engineered, consumer-oriented Disney spiritual experience, which, I use Disney as a shorthand, but it's everywhere. It's in the way that spirituality has been commodified and sold to the Western world. The opposite is the monastic vigil, and the way that the monastic life is organized around constructed experiences that draw attention to the sacred and unique quality moment to moment. The vigil, specifically the way that for example, Franciscan monks will ring the bell and acknowledge every hour, and every hour a different prayer associated with it. And just as someone who tends to think in terms of deep time, 4 billion years ago, 4 billion years in the future, the possibility that convergent physical pressures have led to similar biological outcomes on other planets. Kelly's argument that the inevitability of, you put the car at the top of the track and you run down. It's not that simple, but all rivers will eventually run to the ocean. That there's this sense in which I'm constantly trying to grab that large context and bring it to people as a gift, as a gesture of healing, as a way of restoring that lost connection we once had to the cosmos. And I think that's much more the emphasis now on events that I'm participating in than it was even a few years ago. And I think in a large part it has to do with, people like Lady Apples and, some of these other people that you brought on the show that recognized this opportunity not just to celebrate, but to gather together in a kind of mass experiment, a mass collaboration. And, again, Occupy is a really good, although kind of embryonic example of the way I see this manifesting on the world stage. Like my friends Papadosio just threw a festival in Ohio called the Rootwire Festival. And the entire event, start to finish, was branded not only as an opportunity for revelry and celebration, but also as this almost like not a conference so much or an intensive, but a real emphasis on quote-unquote conscious content, and a real emphasis on the way that, for example, the band would get up on stage and they would talk about the lectures that were going to be given the next day, and people that they really respected, they invited to the event, elders in the community that they wanted, their people that were there just to see the band. They were like, don't sleep until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Go see guys talk. Go listen to this work on, participate in this workshop on energy work. And there's a real emphasis on taking it home and figuring out how, on an individual basis, and, with our members of our own regional communities, exactly how to implement these practices in our daily lives, because it's just, the whole Burning Man decompression is so frustrating. It's so frustrating to go home and realize that now standing in line in the AT&T store again, and that all of this money and all of this creativity went into the consolidation and accumulation of limited resources rather than this collaborative exploration of our potential as a species. I think that's kind of more and more the focus these days, and I'm doing my best to help bring that into focus.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to kind of wrap up here. We have one more track that I want to play, but before that, I just wanted to point people to Michael Garfield, your blogspot.com. You can find out all about your music, events, and things like that. And just pick up finally on what you said. I think that's a really wonderful point. In fact, this show and a lot of my speaking and lecturing has kind of come out, been inspired by that festival example. It's like, I can, do talks in universities and at conferences, and I do plenty of that too, but there's something different, and for me, even more improvisatory about giving talks in those environments. I very rarely plan very much in advance a few sort of directions I want to go, and then I really ride that same energy, and it's been extraordinary, some of the places that I've gone with people, in probably a very similar way to the way that you've performed, because there's something really interesting and unique and increasingly intelligent about that festival environment, with the talks, with the actual practices, with the learning, with the strong networking that goes on there, that goes back into people's lives. So I think it is a place for an optimistic bounce back after another KO. So thanks for being on the show. I thought we might just go out with playing the selection from Fire Swamp 2, and then we can just go to the break. So thanks again for being on the show, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Erik.
Anything you want to say about Fire Swamp 2?
Yeah, this is another example for the way that a constructed spectacle can work to bring people into this more cosmic perspective. And you talk about this a lot, the Eleusinian mystery school, the initiation rites, and the way that it's not always just a beautiful, easy thing, transformation, every birth is a death, and there's something about direct confrontation of the surprise. Like you know that you're going into a surprise. I value the surprise. And that means that, sometimes it's a tremendous, terrifying ordeal that eventually, just the phase state between one state of matter and another, the way that a boiling pot of water reaches this threshold of transformation, and then the gas, or, the pressure that crushes carbon into a diamond. Moving over the threshold. So this is an example of a kind of a darker side of the music, and the way that it moves into it sort of swirls into a new dynamism. And so this is the very end 10-minute kind of rather jagged and dark thing that I was pretty happy with, because it's a Princess reference. The fires, they make it out.
That's true. All right, so we'll end on that jagged but inspiring note. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Erik.